judge in the morning. I'm sitting in the bath, letting it all sink in. I wake up on a sofa and I walk out to your balcony, and I wonder if East Croydon would ever stop for me. If I just asked politely, if I just asked or fell to my knees, if I just asked politely, would it stop for me?
These walls would lean in to guide me to greatness, awesome, greater fixation.
I used to glue my sutures in a Sainsbury's basement,
Tear drunk on the floor.
We felt ageless and endless.
You were my drunken salvation.
And nothing really changes, just the faces and the spaces where our fingers interlock. We breathe it in, we pass it on as we stare over this great endless perhaps, and my heart beats a rhythm that my lungs cannot match.
Someone's crying in the hall, but I don't really understand what turns a night from tragic to a song sung by a wedding band.
We felt ageless and endless.
You were my drunken salvation.
And nothing really changes, just the faces and the spaces where our fingers interlock. We breathe it in, we pass it on as we stare over this great endless perhaps, and my heart beats a rhythm that my lungs cannot match.
We wax lyrical in late December, freezing cold, crouched around a campfire.
But I always wake up on your sofa, and I walk out to your balcony, and I wonder if East Croydon would ever stop for me. If I just asked politely, if I just asked politely, if I just asked politely, would it stop for me?
I see you bang your head against everything, try and ride my bike up the stairs. Burn everything we brought from them, cut the power, make like we were never there. It's nights like these we roll so we drop. There's on there a long thief, it's all that we've got. Leave all of your possessions
Hello! Hello! When was the last time I streamed? I do not remember. Sorry it's been so long again. I've been so busy. And I'm going to be busy until, like, someday. So that's awesome. So I figured late night stream tonight. Because I want to fit a stream in before next week. I didn't want to wait. So we're going to be doing just some chill reading. How long is this chapter? Okay, not too bad. Okay, at least I don't think. Ooh. All right. It's going to be chapter 5 of Through a Glass Divine, the thing we've been reading. The story we've been reading. Sorry, I'm just a little bit like energy drained, but not too much. I can get through the stream. That's why I wanted to do something chill and like not really play Minecraft or anything. Alrighty, let's do it, shall we? And of course, if you're new to my stream and you like this content, be sure to leave a follow. I stream sporadically. I have no schedule because I'm super busy IRL and I never know when I'm going to have time to stream. Now that we got that out of the way, let's read, shall we? Alright. Let's do... boop. Alrighty. So I feel like music might be a bit too quiet. So I'm gonna turn it up on your end, not on mine, because it's not very loud for me, but if I turn it up anymore, it's going to like break my eardrums. Alright. Bones, Through a Glass Divine is a story written by Bones and the Bees, who writes amazing works such as Tommy and Its Clinic for Supervillains, Nocturnal Animals, Under the Brine. These are ones that I've read on stream. And the last one that The Stars and Their Children, was the previous one that we read. If you... oh, man. I would upload my VODs to, like, a VOD channel, but I have, like YouTube has different copyright, like, rules than Twitch does. While the music that I play, like, before stream starts isn't DMCA, it could still get copyright claimed on YouTube. And I don't have an editing software that I can edit it without uploading it without a watermark. And I don't have the money for an editing software. So I wish I could say you guys could, like, watch my VODs of me reading the other stories, but unfortunately you can't. Maybe once I get an editing software, I'll do that. Because I have a YouTube channel. But then I'd have to, like... I don't know if I want to post all my VODs, though. Because that would take a while. I don't know, man. Let's get reading, shall we? Chapter 5. Suffocating the Bird. Summary. The Pythia receives a vision. Trigger warnings for this chapter are description of suffocation and minor injuries. I always read like almost always read like last paragraph being at the very bottom, and then I scroll down like this. So maybe sometimes I'll do a little bit of a delay. So if it looks like there's going to be like the triggering bits up ahead, I'll let you guys know. And so you guys can do whatever you need to feel safe. An echoing knock against metal. Panicked gasps against the palm of his hand. Yelping. Arms burning as he struggles to pin him to the wall. Blue eyes bright with terror. Blue eyes fluttering shut. Heart pounding in his ears as he sprints for the door. The Pythia woke from the dream with a sharp gasp. Bolting upright, blankets fell away from his sides as disjointed sights and sounds flashed in his mind. His thoughts were clouded by a thick haze, and it took him an extra moment to process what this meant. What the implications of his dream actually were. Squeezing his eyes shut, he tried to burn them into his memory, not wanting to forget a single second of what Clara showed him. He'd had a vision. Clara had sent him a vision. Even in the heart of a temple of death, Clara could still see him. He wasn't lost to her. She'd been able to see him the entire time. He wasn't sure if the thing bubbling up his chest was a laugh or a sob. The vision itself had shown him Tommy. It was disconnected and unclear exactly what was happening, but from what the Pythia could tell, it was an escape attempt. If Clara was showing him this, that meant she wanted him to escape from here. He'd kept her waiting for too long, and now she had to step in and tell him to get back to the palace and under her gaze once more. I understand, Clara, he whispered to the air, kneeling on the stone as he lifted his eyes to the painted ceiling. I understand what you want me to do, and I'll do everything in my power to carry out your will. The room wrapped him in silence. He suppressed the urge to shudder. This was it. This was his purpose. Clara wanted him to escape, which meant he had no choice but to go through with it now. Reaching under his pillow, he pulled out a piece of paper covered in bright orange ink. A few nights before, he had asked Tommy if he could have paper and something to draw with, citing it as something to do on nights he struggled to fall asleep. In reality, though, he'd been using the supplies to draw out a map of the temple, and the result actually wasn't all that bad. While the Pythia wasn't much of an artist himself, the layout of the temple was clear on the page. One main chamber, with 3 chambers off to the side, each with their own rooms connecting from there. Even though he was sure there had to be more than just one entrance and exit from the temple, he didn't know where a second one would be, meaning the way he'd come in with Tommy was the way he would have to leave from. The problem was the location of the door. It was right at the front of the main chamber. While Jack had been guarding the door the night he was kidnapped, since then he hadn't seen anyone stationed by it, at least during the day. But even without a guard, the chamber was the central point of the temple. People walked through it all the time. If the Pythia somehow got to the door, he wouldn't have any time to fuck around. Which was more than a bit nerve-wracking, considering he still wasn't sure how to open the door in the first place. It's not like he had any way of finding that out beforehand, though. So he'd just have to pray to Claire that it would be easy to figure out. Although he couldn't tell when the vision was going to happen, he knew that Clara would want it to be sooner rather than later. It would have to be at night after he and Tommy had both retired to their rooms. It couldn't be too late, because if Tommy was asleep, then the whole plan would go to shit. But it needed to be late enough that the other Deathlings weren't going to be walking around the temple. Clara wanted him to do this. He refused to fail her again. Tommy was unusually quiet that morning. It wasn't that he seemed upset. No, there was no hint of anger or frustration in his voice the few times he did say something to the Pythia. But something was off. That much he could tell. When they arrived in the cafeteria, he expected Tommy to lead him to the same rug they always sat on with Tubbo, Amesy, and Rambu. The three of them were already waving him over, but to the Pythia's surprise, Tommy instead turned the opposite direction. They made their way to an empty rug in the far corner of the cafeteria, but the Pythia didn't miss the way that Tubbo, Amesy, and Rambu were frowning at the two of them from a distance. "I'll go get our food," Tommy said, his voice flat as he turned on his heel to the front of the room. For lack of anything else to do, the Pythia sat down on the empty rug. He curled against the wall, wrapping his arms around his knees and trying to ignore the questioning stares coming from the trio of Tubbo, Amesy, and Rambu. I have a theory. Maybe Tommy experiences the same visions that the Pythia does. And that's how he knew when to raid, or when to capture Will, or the Pythia. We know he's Wilbur, but still. And maybe, like, he's like, and so he saw the vision of him, like, being, like, knocked out or something, and the Pythia trying to escape. Maybe that's why. After a few moments, Tubbo got to his feet and headed to the front where Tommy was already loading up their trays. The Pythia watched the two of them talk, heads bowed close together and a worried frown painted across Tubbo's face. Tubbo then raised an eyebrow as if asking a question, and Tommy shook his head, waving off Tubbo's concern. As Tommy made his way back to their rug, the Pythia saw Tubbo give his friend one last worried look, before shaking his head and sitting back on his own rug with Amesy and Rambu. "Why aren't we sitting with them today?" was the first thing the Pythia asked when Tommy came back over with the trays. Tommy shrugged as he handed the Pythia his food, sitting down on the rug and immediately slumping against the wall. "Just don't feel like talking too much today." "Huh? Are you sick?" the Pythia asked, frowning at him. Tommy let out an annoyed huff. "No, I'm not sick. You just said you don't feel like talking," the Pythia pointed out. "And that means I have to be sick?" Tommy questioned. The Pythia nodded, and Tommy scoffed. "I just don't feel like fucking talking much today, okay?" There was a sharp edge to Tommy's voice now that the Pythia rarely heard from him. An icy fire sat behind his eyes, but it was far from blazing. If anything, it reminded him of dull coals, only lighting up when stoked, but otherwise as cold as could be. The Pythia thought back to the night before. It had been 2 days since he dropped the soup on the ground, so it wouldn't make sense for Tommy to get upset about that now. But nothing else had happened since then. They'd simply gone through their routine like normal. You know, I thought it'd be a relief to get you to finally shut the fuck up. This is just weird, the Pythia muttered, taking a bite of his soy eggs, a cheap substitute for eggs. While they weren't nearly as flavorful as real eggs, the texture was mostly the same, so he'd take what he could get. Beside him, Tommy's fork clattered on his tray. Can you seriously just shut up? Tommy snapped, whipping his head towards him. I'm not in the mood to deal with your bullshit today. Oh? The Pythia couldn't ignore the way something inside of him sparked at this. Because up until now, Tommy had been infuriatingly patient with him. Insults, giving him the cold shoulder, the entire mess that was him tipping over his breakfast the other day. None of it had shaken Tommy. But now that seemed to have changed. And the Pythia hadn't even been the one to cause it. Oh, come on now, the Pythia crooned, leaning closer to Tommy. There has to be something that went wrong to get you all worked up like this. Did you find a hole in your favorite pair of socks this morning? Tommy clenched his jaw, keeping his eyes firmly on his tray. I swear to fucking death herself. What is it? What is it? The Pythia pushed, grinning now. You've been so unrattled by everything I've done, and suddenly you're hanging on by a thread? His smile sharpened as he pressed his shoulder to Tommy's. What's got you so worked up, kiddo? You can tell me. It's not like I have anyone else to talk to here. He was just trying to get under Tommy's skin. For the first time since he got here, there was a scab he could pick at. He wanted to know what pissed Tommy off, and he could see the boy struggling to keep his composure. His prosthetic hand was curled into a fist, and his eyebrows were twitching as he squeezed his eyes shut. I'm not playing your stupid game, Tommy suddenly said. Just let me eat my fucking food. What game? I'm not playing a game here, the Pythia shot back. I just want to know what got on your nerves. Tommy rolled his eyes. So you could use it to bug me more? Precisely. There was a beat of silence. The Pythia waited for Tommy to tell him to fuck off, or for him to finally snap. Instead, though, he uncurled his fist and let out a deep sigh. Nightmare, he finally said in a low voice. I had a fucking nightmare and barely got any sleep last night, so I'm a little out of it today. Are you happy now? The Pythia blinked, his smile disappearing. That wasn't what he'd been expecting Tommy to say. Of course, the Pythia was no stranger to nightmares himself. There'd been many times he'd woken up from non-vision dreams drenched in a cold sweat. His heart would pound in his chest as he stared at the ceiling, counting the threads of his canopy to try and root himself back into his body, to drag himself out of the mess in his head and back into the present moment. Hi, Mirage! Been a while since I've seen you in my chat. Chapter 5. Yeah, you missed a lot depending on when you started watching me read Bones and the Beast stories. This is Through a Glass Divine. I've been busy, he says, while playing League of Legends. So real. I've been really busy with the reason why I haven't been streaming that often is because I'm busy with college, you know? I can't stream for the next few days because I have like 7 to 10 rehearsals. Like 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. rehearsals. And then on Saturday, a dress rehearsal and then a concert. Last thing I remember you reading was like, fuck, I don't even know. The things that I've read so far, the first thing I ever read was Passerin by Theseus. But, and then I started reading Bones and the Bees. I'm suspended? Dude. I read Tommy and Its Clinic for Supervillains, Under the Brine, Nocturnal Animals, The Stars and Their Children, and then now this. It takes a lot for, like, that to get suspended. Wait, you were like a freshman when I was a junior or senior. How are you still in high school? Because I'm a junior in college. Did you get held back? You were okay. You were a freshman when I was a junior. You should be a freshman in college right now. Or were you a freshman when I was a senior? Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, I did. That asshole. Oh yeah, since I haven't really like somewhat strong feelings about a person that lied to me and manipulated me for 2 years. Yeah, I'd like to think so. I'm not gonna get into it on stream. I don't. You forgot? Not to mention he's been saying misogynistic things on TikTok last I remember. That was like in like 2021. Let's see, where was I? So in this story, it's not very in this story, it's another SBI fanfiction. Bones and the Bees writes pretty much only like SBI main, like central fanfics. In this one, Wilbur Soot is a prophet named the Pythia, and he got captured by deathlings so there's two main like religions in this. There's people that worship Clara and then people that worship Kristen. Clara is like a goddess, and then Kristen is the goddess of death. And so obviously this story is gonna have religious trauma. Oh. All right, I see the redemption. Hi, yummy water. For your troubles. Thank you. Alright, let's see. I'll just reread this paragraph. Of course, the Pythia was no stranger to nightmares himself. There had been many times he'd woken up from non-vision dreams, drenched in a cold sweat. His heart would pound in his chest as he stared at his ceiling, counting the threads of his canopy to try and root himself back into his body. To drag himself out of the mess in his head and head back into the present moment. For some reason, he couldn't imagine Tommy in that same position. Yet here they were. Sounds good. A heavy silence hung in the air between them. Tommy's shoulders were hunched up, looking like he'd snap in two if the Pythia so much as tapped him. He kept his eyes on his food, but didn't make a move to touch any of it. It was as if he was waiting for something. After a minute... What? Got nothing to say to that? Tommy challenged, looking up to meet the Pythia's blindfold. And while the Pythia knew Tommy was expecting him to be a dick about that, now that he knew the reason for the dark circles hanging under his eyes, now that he understood why there was a slight tremble in his hands, he couldn't do it. Not over something like that. No, I don't. The Pythia said quietly, focusing back on his food. Tommy was silent for a moment. The Pythia could feel the weight of his stare on his shoulders. Why not? He then asked, exhaustion leaking into his words again. The Pythia shrugged. Nightmares suck. Another pause. It's just a dream, Tommy muttered, bringing his knees up to his chest. You know I shouldn't get so freaked out by it because it's not real, but they still fuck me up sometimes. For some reason, his chest squeezed at how small Tommy's voice was when he said that. It didn't make sense considering that he and Tommy were about as far apart from friends as they could be. Tommy was his kidnapper. Thanks, dude. He was annoying, loud, and had done a lot of shitty things to him since they first met. There was no reason for the Pythia to feel bad for him. And yet, he couldn't help but think that Tommy sounded so young. I mean, you're talking to the guy whose entire existence kind of revolves around dreams. The Pythia pointed out, his voice low. I've woken up having panic attacks because of my dreams before, so don't get upset at yourself for being freaked out. Your brain can come up with some pretty terrifying things. At this, Tommy frowned. You've gotten panic attacks from... He trailed off, clearly hesitant to put his question into words. The Pythia knew what he wanted to ask, though. Yeah, I've had panic attacks from my visions before, he answered, pointedly not looking Tommy's way now. I've gotten them from my normal dreams too, though. Tommy considered this as some of the tension leaked out of his shoulders. So you still dream normally too? The Pythia nodded. And you can tell the difference between a vision and a normal dream? Another nod. This is further proving my theory. So I'm thinking, okay. So the Pythia is a prophet. He gets visions from Clara, supposedly. That's how he knew he was going to be kidnapped. He tried warning the president of this place, Schlatt, but Schlatt was like, no, we're gonna have this party anyway. But then the Deathlings came and captured the Pythia. So here's what I'm thinking. The Pythia in the beginning of this chapter had a vision that he was like knocking Tommy out and trying to escape. What if Tommy has visions too. And him asking, you still dream normally too, and you can tell the difference between a vision and a normal dream, is subtly asking, how do you tell the difference between a vision and a normal dream? Because he's young. He still hasn't figured it out. And the reason why... I swear to God, if I'm right, I'm gonna feel so smart about this. But if I'm way off, I'm gonna feel so stupid. Silence fell again. The Pythia wasn't sure why he just told Tommy all of that, but the ache in his chest had lessened somewhat, so he didn't regret it. Besides, it's not like he divulged any important information. He just told Tommy something he didn't know already. I think that might be a bit of a reach. I think Tommy might have visions, but he doesn't have the same visions, maybe similar ones. That is also a possibility. But he said he had a nightmare last night. Like, the night before. At the same time as the Pythia. Here. Tommy's voice cut through his thoughts again, and the Pythia glanced up to see Tommy handing him a bread roll. Oh, I have one, the Pythia said, holding up his own roll. Tommy huffed and shoved his own bread onto the Pythia's plate. You like them more than anything else here, so take it. You don't eat enough anyway. With that, Tommy turned back to his plate and refused to look in the Pythia's direction again. Picking up the new bread roll in his hands, the Pythia tore it in two, watching steam curl out from the soft insides. The smell was heavenly, and he didn't miss the way Tommy snorted when the Pythia's stomach let out a low growl. When he was almost done with his second bread roll, his vision from the night before flashed through his mind again. Blue eyes bright with terror, blue eyes fluttering shut. I gotta find out what the fuck people are saying to make me think. That I don't know what you said, and I'm so sorry. I don't know why that shouldn't have happened. I keep forgetting to see if there's a way to fix this. I don't know why. Nobody spams symbols. Like, bruh, I'm so sorry. His plan. He needed to go through with it tonight if he could. The ache in his chest returned full force, and when he tried to eat the last of his bread, he realized he wasn't hungry anymore. Oh yeah, that's right. It counts any normal character as a symbol. Pretty much typed. Oh, was it like a really long paragraph? Because I think that's probably what. Is it the exact vision or is it something similar? We don't know. We don't know if it's the, like, I'm theorizing that it's the exact same vision. I have a feeling that that's where this story is gonna go. Night came far too quickly for the Pythia's liking. Like the vision transferring to IRL. The exact same vision. The entire day, dread hung over him like a dark cloud. excuse me. It crawled up his spine, wrapping around his chest and making the bird inside his chest fight against the cage of his ribs once again. Every time he looked in Tommy's direction, it only got worse, because there was only one way this plan was going to work. He was going to have to hurt Tommy to do it. Is it like he walks through a door, the exact door in his vision? The exact door in his vision. This was the most puzzling part of it all. While he was certainly afraid of the possible consequences if his attempt failed, more than anything, his worry wasn't for himself at all. It was all centered around his kidnapper. Sam's words kept playing on repeat in his mind. Like I said, it won't kill you, but... He repeated it to himself like a mantra. This wouldn't kill Tommy. It would probably scare him, but it wouldn't kill him. He hoped. It felt as if 1 minute he was sitting in the cafeteria eating breakfast with Tommy. The next, he was in his room, his dinner already settling in his stomach. Tommy had spent the day doing more chores while Epithio followed him like a lost duckling. There was less tension between the two of them than there had been for the past few days, and he was sure it had something to do with their conversation over breakfast. But the more he thought about that conversation, the worse the ache in his chest got. So he did his best to push it to the back of his mind. Epithio truly, sincerely hoped that this wouldn't give Tommy more nightmares. He didn't deserve that. After Tommy had dropped him back off in his cell, he sat on his bed, staring at the ceiling as he struggled to decide if tonight was the night. His gut was telling him it was. There was no reason to put it off. Although Claire hadn't given him any indicators for when his escape attempt happened, he just knew she wanted it done tonight. He glanced at the door that separated his and Tommy's room. A rock dropped into his stomach. Tommy wasn't a good person. He had to remind himself of that. He was a deathling, and had probably committed multiple acts of terrorism against his country. And again, Tommy had kidnapped him. He still shuddered when he remembered the haze that had settled over his mind when Tommy had tranquilized him. And although the cuts on his cheeks had healed over, he could still see the faint marks they'd left behind. Tommy had hurt him, in more ways than one. But he was also 18. Sorry, my throat was getting a bit dry. At 18 years old, Tommy's arms were covered in evidence of near-death experiences. From what the Pythia could tell, Tommy had joined the Deathlings at a young age. A very young age. He was almost starting to suspect that Tommy had been born into it, because even though Tommy called Phil by his first name, he wouldn't be surprised if he found out that Phil was Tommy's father. The two did share an uncanny resemblance after all. Either way, it was unlikely that Tommy had much life experience on his own before he joined the Deathlings. So could the Pythia really fault him for his loyalty to them, if it was all he'd ever known? Gritting his teeth, the Pythia shook his head to try and clear away those thoughts. It didn't matter. Tommy was still a Deathling, and he was keeping the Pythia from performing his duty to Clara. If he wanted to escape, he'd have to go through Tommy no matter what. The rock in his gut grew heavier. It was late enough. Now or never. Clara, he whispered under his breath. I need guidance, please. He tried to picture Clara standing behind him, her hands on his shoulders, steadying him as he prepared to execute his plan. A phantom warmth against his skin, one that was entirely made up, but he leaned into nonetheless. The cage of his ribs rattled as he pushed to his feet and made his way to the door that led to Tommy's room. "Tommy?" he called out, blood roaring in his ears as he knocked on the metal. "You awake?" A beat ticked by, then another. Dread stabbed into his gut like a knife. "Coming!" came Tommy's muffled reply. The dread only grew stronger as he listened to Tommy's footsteps approach the door. There was the sound of something unlocking, and the door swung open to reveal Tommy standing on the other side. His hair was sticking up in different directions, and his eyes were half-lidded, like he'd just been on the edge of sleep. "What's up?" he asked, yawning mid-sentence. The Pythia's heart slammed against his ribs. For a moment, he was frozen, knowing what he had to do, but his limbs refusing to take a step forward. I need water," he stammered out. "My pitcher ran out." Narrowing his eyes, Tommy glanced over his shoulder at the pitcher behind him. "Oh, okay. I have some in my room." It was then that Tommy turned around to look back in his own room. It was then that Tommy's back was turned to the Pythia. It was then that the Pythia knew that this was the moment. Before he could let himself think twice, the Pythia shoved forward, grabbing Tommy by the shirt and driving him into the wall. Tommy gasped, eyes going wide with shock, but before he could fight back, the Pythia lifted his hand and slammed it over Tommy's mouth and nose. The Pythia wasn't a fighter. Even before he became the Pythia, he always chose flight over fight. He was weak, but he was fast. Overpowering someone was never something he'd even attempted before. Even though Tommy was stronger than him, the Pythia was taller. And while that didn't give him much of an advantage, it gave him a few extra seconds he knew he wouldn't have had otherwise. Tommy squirmed under his grip, letting out muffled screams as he tried to push the Pythia away. He leaned all his weight into Tommy, though, pinching his nose and keeping his hand over his mouth to block his airways as best he could. Panicked gasps puffed against his palm. His arms burned as he leaned his entire body against Tommy to keep him from pushing back. Suddenly, Tommy's eyes widened as realization flooded through him. It was at this exact moment the Pythia felt his breathing hitch. His fighting became more frenzied. Tommy clawed at his arms, and the Pythia forced himself to hold on. Tommy's chest rapidly rose and fell, hiccups clawing their way out of his throat as he had to fight to breathe. Then, his chest stopped moving. Tommy's entire body went rigid as he tried to pull the Pythia's hand off his face, but as the seconds ticked on, his eyes began to flutter shut. The Pythia yanked his hand away, and Tommy clutched at his chest, making strange wheezing sounds as he tried to take a breath. Before he could let his panic sink in, the Pythia shoved Tommy into his cell, and the boy fell to his knees just past the doorway. His mouth was open in a silent gasp. There was no air moving in and out of his lungs. For a moment, the Pythia could only stare in horror, because Tommy was suffocating. He was hunched over and suffocating despite the fact that there was nothing stopping him from breathing. Nothing but his own lungs. Just for an explanation, in this world, it's like cyberpunky, and cybernetics are a thing. A lot of people have like cybernetic limbs. Tommy has like a cybernetic arm, but he also has like cybernetic lungs, and sometimes they malfunction. The Pythia needed to go. He was running out of time and he knew it. But Tommy's face was starting to turn blue, and why the fuck were his lungs still not working? His vision flashed through his mind again. He had to leave before Tommy started breathing again. "I'm sorry!" the Pythia gasped out. As the door to his cell slammed shut, the last thing the Pythia saw were Tommy's eyes bright with terror. Then, there was a wall of metal separating them, and the clock began. He couldn't breathe. Panic was gripping him like a vice as he sprinted into Tommy's room, only briefly taking note of the multicolored clouds painted on the walls and the false stars twinkling on his ceiling as he made his way to the door. His head was a spiraling mess of panic and horror as Tommy's terrified gaze kept flashing in his mind. He ran into the hallway, struggling to keep himself upright as he ran down the hall and past his own cell door, which was still firmly shut. Tommy could open it from the inside, but he hadn't gotten up yet. The Pythia ignored the implications of what that could mean and forced himself to finish what he started. His legs burned as he sprinted into the main chamber, his footsteps echoing off the cavernous ceiling. He heard a faint yell from someone behind him, but ignored it. Spinning on his heel, he bolted for the door, the watchful gaze of Kristen boring into his back. The door got closer. The voices behind him got louder. His lungs were screaming. His thoughts were spinning. He was almost there. Almost there. Almost there. Almost... Right before his fingers could brush the metal, something slammed into him with so much force, it sent him face first into the ground. Pain exploded in his skull as his head hit the stone, his vision spinning as he fought against the weight on top of him. "Let me go!" he screamed, clawing at the person pinning him down like a rabid animal. The world was a kaleidoscope of gray stone and pink holograms and metal feathers as he was flipped onto his back, arms pinned to the ground as a crushing weight settled on his chest. He fought and fought and fought, but his energy quickly waned. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. And as his vision cleared and he saw who was pinning him to the floor, the last bit of hope he had shriveled up into nothing in his chest. "Please!" he begged anyway, even though he knew it was pointless. "Let me go! I can't be here! I have to serve her!" Above him, Phil's face was twisted into a scowl. "Where's Tommy?" he demanded instead of responding to his pleas. Immediately, the Pythia's cries died out. Meeting Phil's eyes behind his blindfold again, he couldn't stop the shame that washed over him as he thought back to Tommy's terror. When he didn't say anything, Phil's scowl deepened. "I'm going to ask you again," he repeated in a low voice, the grip on the Pythia's wrists tightening enough to make him whimper. "Where is Tommy?" The Pythia took a shaky breath. He's in my cell. I got him to open our shed door and threw him in there." "How did you overpower him?" Another voice cut in, and the Pythia looked past Phil's shoulder to see Techno standing over them both. The Pythia shrunk back under the duo's furious stares. They were going to kill him now. He was sure of it. His lungs, he whispered. And Techno and Phil's eyes both widened in terror. You need to go check on him. I didn't wait to see. Phil was jumping off of him and running before the Pythia could even finish his sentence. Techno watched him go, looking as though he was barely holding himself back from running after him. But instead, he crouched down in front of the Pythia. You should send your prayers to your goddess now, Techno whispered, his red eyes blazing with a kind of fury that made the Pythia's blood run cold. Pray that he's not dead, because if he is, you won't find any mercy in death. With that, Techno pushed himself back to his feet and yanked the Pythia up with him by the wrist. Pain flashed through his arm, but he forced down his yelp as he tried to catch his balance. He staggered forward, dizziness washing over him, but Techno caught him before he could fall. Techno then pulled something out of his pocket. He tugged the Pythia's hands behind his back, and a tight band wrapped around his wrists, binding them together. The Pythia's chest was heaving. His temples were throbbing, and nausea was crawling up his throat, his dinner threatening to reappear any second now. Sam said it wouldn't kill him, the Pythia murmured. Techno's eyes narrowed. What? He and Tommy were talking about his lungs the other day, he clarified, his voice hoarse from screaming. Sam said that if they were overwhelmed, it wouldn't kill him. That's not a guarantee, Techno pointed out. You can never guarantee something like that with cybernetics. Oh. Fuck. What's going on? The Pythia bit back a wince as Tubbo poked his head into the main chamber, frowning as he noticed Techno's hold on him. Techno opened his mouth to reply, but paused, before making some strange hand gestures at his head before pointing at Tubbo. Before the Pythia could ask what he was doing, Tubbo responded with, Yeah, they're on. What the fuck's happening? Clara's Chosen tried to escape, Techno explained, pulling on the Pythia's arm to guide him back towards the cell. Tubbo's mouth dropped open in shock, before his head snapped back in the direction of the cell. Where's Tommy? Phil's checking on him now, Techno explained, leading the Pythia into the hallway with Tubbo now on his other side. Apparently he did something to Tommy's lungs. For a moment, Tubbo frowned, as if he didn't process what he said. Then, the realization hit. You fucking shit! Suddenly, Techno was throwing himself in between Tubbo and the Pythia, blocking Tubbo from physically attacking him. He was still holding onto the Pythia's arm with one hand, but used his other arm to push Tubbo back. Tubbo! No! He protested, trying to duck under Techno's arm to get to him. Rambo! Techno yelled down the hall. I need you! Immediately, Rambu's head poked out from one of the many doors lining the hallway. Techno? What's... He cut himself off the second he saw Tubbo. Running over, he grabbed Tubbo from behind, ignoring his screams of protest as he dragged the much shorter boy away from the Pythia. Tubbo! What's going on? Let go of me! He hurt Tommy! Tubbo exclaimed, trying to squirm out of Rambu's grip, with little success. Rambu froze, still holding on to Tubbo, but staring at the Pythia with unbridled fear. "What did you do?" he whispered. "Look, we'll give everyone a rundown later. I need to go see how Tommy's doing," Techno said, turning the other direction with the Pythia in tow. They stumbled along the dark hallway, anxiety writhing inside the Pythia's gut as they got closer and closer to his cell. Phil was nowhere to be seen, and neither was Tommy. He wasn't sure if that was a good sign or a bad one. Techno paused outside the door to the cell. Neither one of them could hear any noise coming from inside. The rock that hadn't left the Pythia's gut the entire evening only grew heavier. "Kristen." Techno's head was turned up to the ceiling, his voice so low the Pythia could barely hear him. "Not yet. Please." The Pythia was shaking as Techno typed in the passcode for the door. There was a soft whir as it unlocked. Then, after taking a deep breath, Techno forced the door open. The first thing the Pythia saw in his room was Phil crouching down next to the wall. The second thing he noticed was Tommy leaning against the wall, eyes open and chest moving up and down. Oh, thank fuck. Phil had a hand resting on Tommy's shoulder, using his other hand to gesture up and down, like he was guiding Tommy on how to breathe. Tommy's eyes were focused on his hand, following the motion as his own chest mimicked the pattern. When Techno brought the Pythia into the room, though, both their heads snapped towards them. "He's okay?" Techno asked, still sounding unsure. Phil gave a small nod. "Yeah, shaken up, but he's okay." Although it was subtle, the Pythia didn't miss the way Techno's shoulders slumped at this. Meanwhile, Tommy's eyes met the Pythia's blindfold, and the Pythia's own breathing hitched. Tommy's eyes were bloodshot, his mouth set into a grim line. He had his arms wrapped around himself, but despite that, the Pythia could see he was trembling. A beat passed. Tommy opened his mouth to speak. Immediately, he was cut off by a violent coughing fit. His voice sounded like gravel, and Phil frowned, shaking his head at Tommy in the same way a disapproving father would. "Don't try to speak," Phil told him. "Just focus on breathing." Tommy scowled at this, but didn't try to speak again. Techno let go of the Pythia's arm, leaving him by the door as he made his way over to Tommy. The Pythia shrunk into the corner as he watched Techno crouch in front of Tommy. Although no words passed between them, he could see a silent exchange taking place, with Techno raising an eyebrow and Tommy nodding. Then, Tommy let out a deep sigh and slumped forward. Techno caught him and pressed his forehead against Tommy's, both closing their eyes for just a moment. As soon as the moment happened, though, it was gone. Techno got back to his feet, while holding out a hand for Tommy to take. Although Tommy was unsteady, he was able to stand, and then Phil rose up behind him as well. The Pythia stumbled away from the trio as they made their way to the door leading out of his cell. Techno and Phil stood on either side of Tommy like guards, although Tommy was scowling like he wasn't thrilled with their behavior. Before they could leave, though, Tommy's eyes flashed to him again. He tapped Phil's shoulder, pointing to him and raising a questioning eyebrow. "We'll deal with him tomorrow. Phil reassured him. Tommy spared one last long look at the Pythia before sighing and allowing himself to be led out of the cell. The door slammed shut behind them, and just like that, the Pythia was alone. Again. The seconds ticked by, and then minutes. The Pythia didn't move from where he was standing. He was frozen as he stared at the door, like he was waiting for someone to rush back in and attack him. It took nearly 15 minutes for the reality to settle on his shoulders. It trickled into his mind, suffocating the bird in his chest as he slowly dropped to his knees. Claire wanted him to escape, but he couldn't. He failed her. A part of the Pythia wanted to cry, but he couldn't. There was too much going on inside of him. Too many conflicting thoughts and feelings. Panic, horror, anger, frustration. Like feathers caught in the wind. They spun around and around in his mind. Never settling, but never giving him peace either. Eventually, his exhaustion got the better of his shock. He went to lean back on his bed and felt pain flare up his arms. It was only then he realized that Techno had never untied his wrists, and they were still bound behind his back. In a way, he supposed he deserved it. Though whether it was for his failure to Clara or what he'd done to Tommy, he wasn't sure. Because his arms were still tied behind his back, he couldn't take his blindfold off. So he left it on, falling face first into the pillow as exhaustion created a haze in his mind. It didn't get rid of his conflicting feelings, but blocked them out with numbness instead. A numbness that was both physical as well as mental. His arms were numb. His mind was numb. His chest wasn't numb. His chest ached horribly. For a while, he floated in the space between dreams and waking. He was aware of his body laying on the mattress, and he was aware of the discomfort in his arms, but he wasn't fully there. Half-dreams floated behind his eyes, disjointed memories echoing in his ears without any rhyme or reason to them. Clara has asked for you, boy. This isn't an offer. It's a calling you can't say no to. A soldier's voice. So we're gonna be working together once I take my old man's crown, eh? And just call me Schlatt. Everyone else does. Things had been so different between him and Schlatt back then. You are not a person. You are the bridge between humanity and the divine. The sooner you understand that, the easier it will be. The former Pythia's last piece of advice. Please come play with us. We won't even have teams without you, The Pythia was jolted out of the half-dreams by the sensation of someone grabbing his arms. He was too tired to move, so he stayed limp, feeling deft fingers gently undo the band around his wrists. His arms ached as they fell limp to his sides. He didn't move, though, and listened to the person behind him get back to their feet. Their footsteps were soft, and he could feel eyes lingering on his face. But even though his blindfold was still on, he didn't dare open his eyes, terrified of who he might find in the room with him. After a few moments of silence, the footsteps faded as the person left. It was only after the door clicked shut that the Pythia realized that one of the hands undoing his ties was made of metal, while the other wasn't. That was his last coherent thought before slipping fully into sleep. Wow. I was hoping we'd get an explanation for Tommy's nightmare in this chapter as well, but that might have to be for a future chapter. Cause man, oh man. This chapter was a bit shorter in comparison to other chapters. How many chapters are there so far? Because this story isn't finished. There's 14 so far. So we have a bit to catch up. Why did I come all the way down here? I didn't need to do that. But that's for another time. Because it is late. My throat is a bit dry. So I'm going to end stream. Let's see if there's anyone I can raid. At this hour, I wouldn't be surprised if not. Ooh. Okay. Let's see. Raid. Is there any? Okay. We're gonna be raiding Ari. He does music. Go show him some love. He's really good. Alright. Don't know when my next stream is gonna be. Hopefully soon, maybe Sunday. I might stream Sunday. Don't know if it's gonna be Minecraft or... I really want to read the next chapter of this, so it might be the next chapter of this. Alright. I hope you guys have a great rest of your night, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!